Okay, so we're going to jump into change management principles, right? And this is such an important discussion in the context of, process improvement, because as you improve processes, as you change processes, transform processes, you would need to manage the change that comes with all this, transformation, right? And that's why it's important that we talk about the framework to managing this change, right? And that's what change management is all about. Because one critical element of change that we often overlook is that resistance is going to come as a result of trying to change something, and that's why I like this quote. It says, change generates resistance, right? And it's awareness of this resistance and the ability to resolve them that is critical because we should anticipate that there will be some form of resistance. It's usually strange when people are surprised that, oh, people are, reluctant or pushing back or saying, giving you reasons why this will not work. We have tried this before. This is we've thought about this before many years ago. It did not work. That's resistance speaking, in a different way. So what I want to do is to arm you with the framework, the thought process, and how to manage change, right? And that's what change management is all about. So let's dive into this course with an open mind, right? And let's see how we're able to look through the different models of managing change. I'm going to look at some very popular ones and look at how you can apply them in the work that you do in improving processes, especially in your manufacturing operations, right? Okay, so let's dive into the meat of this. Okay, so what then is change management, right? And we've set the context in which we will drive this conversation, right? And let me just, take some time to highlight some keywords here. So we are saying that change management is a systematic approach to handling transition or transformation, right? So first of all, it's systematic, right? It's not haphazard. You don't just do whatever you like, right? So we are structural things or there are systems or steps that we follow to say, you know what, we're going to do this first and then do this next and then move to the next one, right? So that's something very critical here. It's a systematic approach, right? And then it is used to handle transition or transformation, right? So we want to handle that transition phase between, oh, this is how we were doing things before and this is how we want to start doing things, now. So we call what we were doing before, our current state, right? So this is what I am currently doing, right? Or we say it's as is, right? This is how it is right now. So what we want to do is to move from this current state to our future state, right? Future state. And this is where we want to be, right? This is a picture of, you know, what an ideal state will look like for us. But between the current phase and the future state, there is that transition point where people are asking themselves, why are we even doing this thing? What's the point, right? Was this thing stressful? We have tried it, it's not going to work, right? So, how do you manage all those objections? How do you manage that process of, we're not sure where we're going to be, we're not sure if this is going to work, to having people being on board to say, you know what, let's give it our best, let's try this new process, let's see if it's even going to, work, right? So change management includes a couple of things that is required to support, right? Let me underline that again. So it's required to support, it's required to prepare, right, and help individuals during a transition, right? So it's a combination of steps or approaches that we're going to use to support our team members, the organization, as we move from one state, right, where we are now, to our future state, right, the transition. And you can apply this even in your personal life, even in a much larger organization like a country, for instance. And I'll try and talk about that as we go on, right? But change management, right, and just to recap, is a systematic approach to help transition, right, to help transformation, to help the team move from one point to the other, right? and all of that. Remember that change usually brings resistance. So what you want is to have the least, to manage the team through the least amount of, resistance and all of that. Okay, so let's look at what are the popular change management models that we have, and this will build a framework for how we manage change, how we, deliver results. We have, transformation projects that, creates values for the organizations that we work for. All right. So when we look at change management models, I'll talk about three popular ones, right? We have Lewin's change management model, we have ADKAR, right? And we have Kotter's eight-step change model, right? So we're going to look at each of these models one after the other, see how they are being used and just try to understand, the thought process for each of these ones that we have here. All right, so let's start with Lewis change management model. So what's Lewis change management model and what's it really about, right? So it was developed by this guy called Lewin back in 1940. So this is quite, a time ago. And I always like to tell people, if a principle or a model is created by someone, it's always good to, know when this person created this, understand some form of history around, the thought process behind this model, right? So this model is also called the unfreeze, change, rephrase model, right? And it refers to these three stages, right? So the first stage is your unfreeze, right? You have change, and then you have rephrase, right? And this is just a pictorial representation of what that looks like. So you have an existing process, right? And we're saying that we're going to first of all unfreeze that, right? To convert this process to a more, malleable form. So we need to unfreeze, and I'm going to get into each of these stages, right? And then after you've unfreezed, you're going to, change to whatever you want. And then when you have that change solidified, you're going to now refreeze this. So refreezing is what is going to, solidify this new mode, this new step, this new way of doing things, right? So let's look at what unfreeze is all about. It says that the first stage of change involves preparing the organization to accept that change is necessary. And this is such an important step, right? The organization needs to realize that, what, we cannot continue doing things the same way, right? We cannot continue, this status quo, right? Because if you try to force something where people have not accepted that it is necessary, people will end up going back to where they are coming from, right? Once they encounter, some form of challenge, resistance. So it's important that organizations and individuals and teams and people understand why this change is necessary. And this is where you're freezing. So you're trying to unbundle this problem. You're trying to make it clear to them that, what, this existing status quo cannot continue, right? We cannot continue this way. If not, this business is not going to survive. This team is not going to survive. We're not going to, keep creating, value. We are going to run out of business and all of that. So it's important that they understand why this change is necessary, right? And if that understanding is not there, building another way of working, another way is not going to last, right? All right, so let's proceed. So it says this first part of the change process is usually the most difficult part, and I'm going to underline that, right? So that you're not feeling bad or you're not feeling like, oh, you're not making any progress. Because imagine that, for instance, this is something that they've been doing for decades, right? Maybe even hundreds of years. They've been acting in this way. This is the business process, right, for the last 50 years. It's not going to happen, trying to make them understand that this status quo cannot continue will not happen overnight, right? So it's usually a difficult process, but it's a necessary step, right, to building sustainable change. If you want to build sustainable change, you need to spend time in ensuring that this is done very well. All right, so it says that when you start cutting down the way of things are done, you put everyone off balance. So people are going to start asking, oh, why now? Why are we changing this? What's happening? You are stressing me. Things have changed, blah, 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 all of that, right? So this is something very important to do. You need to unfreeze, this process. And that's what you have here. So this is the old way of doing things. And then we are melting it, we are breaking it down. We are saying, no, we cannot continue, in this way. All right. So what's the next stage that we have here? The next stage that we look at for Lewis change management model is change, right? So remember that the first stage was to unfreeze. So we've made it important. We've made people understand why we want to, create the change that we're saying we want to do, right? Now we're saying that, okay, now this is the stage in which you actually start changing, right? So we've explained why the change is necessary. Now we take action, right? So it says after the uncertainty created in your free stage where people are confused, oh, what's happening? Why is this happening? Why are we doing a different process, right? The change stage is where the people begin to resolve this, uncertainty. They now start seeing the new way in which things are done, right? People start to see, oh, okay, this thing is actually faster. This is actually better. We're beginning to, believe in this direction, right? And then they can now start supporting it, right? The mistake we make sometimes is that we want to, just change things without first of all unfreezing, right? And this is what this model. Remember that we said that change management is about a systematic approach to handling transition, right? To handling change, to handling, moving from old to the new, right? So this is why you always want to start with unfreezing. You always want to start with, that knowledge of why change is important, why we need to, stop doing things the way we are already doing them now, right? Why we need to move away from the status quo. Okay, so it says people start to believe and act in ways that support this new direction, right? And that's what we want to start seeing in this state change, that belief and support, right? It says also that during this changing step, people begin to learn the new behaviors, processes, and ways of thinking, right? They begin to say, oh, okay, so this is how to even do it, right? This is how it works, right? This is what you need to do, right? And the more prepared they are for the step, the easier it is for them to, complete this, right? This is why at this stage, one of the things that you are going to be doing in this stage is a lot of communication, right? This is something often overlooked. You are going to be communicating a lot, right? So you can see that even though I say communication here, I'm saying education. You are still communicating. As you are communicating, you are educating the people, right, for the reason for the change, why we are doing this. You're providing support, you're providing time, so that they become familiar with this change, right? And then we move to the next, phase. Now look at this analogy, right? It is at this point where we have used a different mode, right? And then we're trying to put this process into this new mode to say, you know what, this is how business is going to go on now, going forward, right? And this is what we are expecting, from you. This is how this new step will work. This is the change that we are going to expect. This is the change that we are going to implement, right? Pardon me there. All right. So the next phase for this is refreeze, right? And in refreeze, we're saying that we are reinforcing and stabilizing and solidifying this new state after the change, right? So remember that the previous phase was stage was change, right? So now we want to reinforce and solidify, right? We want everybody to know that this new step has come to stay, right? This new process has come to stay, you know, has come to stay. Let me just write that here so you don't forget that. So this new process has come to stay, right? And we reinforce this by, providing support to say, you know what, you need time, or yeah, take time. You need resources, take resources, because we don't want any excuse, to say, oh, this is not even working. We don't have the right people. So typically, if I was doing a project where, there was significant, let's say, technological upgrade, right? I would want a situation where for like a month or so, I have technical support from the team, from the OEM, that's the provider of this service, right? Such that if there's any issue, they are able to support them real time. They're able to hold their hand. They're able to reinforce when they want to try and use the old way. No, nobody says, oh, you know what? We have technical support. What's the issue? I'm not able to log in. They'll log in for you. They show you how to log in, all of that. All of that is to reinforce this new way of working, right? So that people do not go back, right? They don't say, oh, it's too hard. It's not working. I don't have support. I cannot even resolve this problem. It's so complicated, right? So you want to be able to, provide this support for them till it becomes a way of life, right? Remember that you're trying to change, them from what they have been doing for a very, very, very long time, right? All right. So once again, language change management model involves three steps, right? We said it involves unfreezing, right? This is where you unbundle, you break down the process, you make that awareness as to why change is necessary, right? And then the next stage is to actually change, right? So this is where you roll out the proposed changes, you implement your changes, and then your final stage, according to Lewin, is the refreeze, right? So this is where you solidify this new process, right? The new process has come to stay, right? And you don't want people going back to their old ways. All right. So I hope you've learned the Lewin's change management model, and you can see how you can apply this in your work as you execute business transformation. All right. Let's move to the next model. Okay, so the next change management model that we'll talk about is called the ADCAR change management model. And this is actually an acronym, right? It's an acronym for 5 outcomes that we expect the individual to, go through for change to be successful. And just try to remember the previous model, Lewin, you'll still see some parallels, right, in how we approach, change management. Remember again that it's a systematic approach. So there will always be some things that you expect that, this has to happen before this and before, the final stage, right? So this process is made up of these 5 steps, right? And it's in this order, right? So the first thing you want to do is awareness, right? And we're going to look at each of them quickly. So we have awareness, we have desire, we have knowledge, we have ability, and we have reinforcement, right? You look at this. So we are saying that you must create awareness, right? Compare that to Lewin's. Lewin's talks about unfreeze. So you see that it's quite similar because we're saying that before we try to push down change, we must create the awareness that is required for people to understand what is about to happen. And then that awareness is going to create the desire. So people are now going to say, you know what, I want to, be a part of this change. And we'll look at them some more in detail just in a minute. And then if we now tell them this is how it's going to work, so that's giving them knowledge, right? So we're going to explain how it is going to work. We're going to teach them how this new process, how this new step is going to, be carried out and all of that. And then 4 is them actually doing it, right? Because you can have the knowledge but not practice, right? So the ability is the action part, right? Is them trying to do it themselves, trying to, oh, let's even try and implement this new process. Is it working? I've learned that this is what they want to achieve. But yeah, let me try it. Is it working? It's working. And then we reinforce that, right? We have reinforcement, right? So again, it's a systematic approach to manage transition, right? It starts awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. Awesome. So let's look at them quickly. So we said awareness is about the need for change. Why do I want to change? Why do we want to, create this change? So you need to build that awareness in your team, in your organization, why this change is necessary, right? What if we decide to, not change, what's going to happen, right? If nothing is going to happen, then the change is not necessary, right? If there is no advantage to, this new process you want us to do, then what's the point? People start asking those questions. Why am I even stressing myself? This new method is slower, it costs a lot of waste, it's not efficient. So why are you making us change? We are not interested in changing. Please leave us alone, and all of that. So you want to build the awareness so that people understand why this change is necessary, right? So this is answering the question, Why is this change necessary? Right. It's also a means of addressing why a change is needed now. Right. So again, we're not just changing because it's nice to do, but there's an urgency, right? There's an urgency in changing now. Every time we do things the old way, we are losing money, right? As an example, we are losing customers, we are losing resources, we are creating a lot of waste, right? So this all of this comes into your awareness, right? You're explaining what's the risk. If I don't do this change, this is what's going to happen, right? And we don't want this to happen for the business, right? So you have only succeeded, right, in building awareness when your team members, when the individual says, okay, I get it now. I understand the nature of the change and why the change is needed, right? And that's what you want, right? When you get to that point where the individual says, I understand now. Oh, okay, makes sense, makes sense. Then you know that you have created sufficient awareness, right? So I understand the nature of the change and I understand why it is needed. All right, let's look at the next one. So desire is the next part, right? And desire talks about, the willingness or to participate or support the change, right? So after you've created the awareness, now we say, oh, wow, I understand why we need. Okay, now, so what can I do now to support this? What's my own role, right, in this change? How do I, help? How can I be a part of this, right? That's what you want, right? What you don't want is to be trying to force, a change on people. You want people to get to the point where they are asking you that, please bring the change. We want this change now, right? We want to experience, this change. And, people say that desire is the most difficult part, right? Practitioners to achieve because it's a personal decision, right? It's not really under your control because you can only create enough awareness. And that's why, for instance, you say the same thing to 100 people and it's not everybody that hears it or is in agreement or is interested, right? So what you want, right, is to have at least some decent number of people who are even getting to that point of desire. So you have a wide spectrum of people who are willing volunteers who are ready, right? Take those guys and we'll look at some of these things as we go on in this course, right? So what you want is that as much as possible you want to have a certain number of people who have that desire, right? Even if it's just one person, there has to be someone who is willing to participate and support this change, right? If there is no one willing to participate or support this change, then something is wrong, right? There's a disconnect somewhere, right? So it's possible that maybe your awareness is not properly done, you're not communicating the actual value, or there's no real value, right, that is obvious that people can see, right? Maybe there is an ulterior motive somewhere, right? So you want to be sure that you at least have desire from someone. It says while there are certain ways to try and influence a person's decision to embrace a change, in the end the individuals must make these decisions themselves. Okay, and it says desire is only achieved when the individual says I will be part of this change, right? So let me just underline that. So the individual is saying, sign me up, I want to be a part of this change. I want to be a part of this change. And this is what you want, right? You want this. You want the individual to, say, I want to be a part of this. All right. So what's the next step here in ADCA? We have K, knowledge, right? So knowledge is about how can we change, right? How to change, right? What's the step? What is required of me, right? So you need to, make sure that you're building knowledge after awareness and desire has been sorted out, right? What you don't want is to be trying to force somebody that is unwilling, that does not even know what you're teaching, and then you're trying to give them knowledge and they're like, okay, I've heard you, but what is in their mind is they've not bought it, right? They've not bought it. And if they don't buy it, it means that they are not going to implement it, right? So what you want to do is to implement that knowledge step after awareness and desire has been successful, right? and all of that. And this is probably why, you know, your transformation has not been sustainable, right? Why your transformation has not been successful, in the past, because you are not, managing change. You are not managing it the right way, right? So, and this is why, again, this is so important in executing transformation, right? And we're saying that there are two types of knowledge, right? The first type of knowledge is how to change, right? So what are we going to do, right? So we're going to be answering this question for them as you are giving them knowledge. Oh, this is how we are going to, change, right? This is what to do during the transition. So moving from, current to future state, these are the things that we need to do, right? And then the next stage is how do I perform effectively? So even now that I now know what is expected of me, how do I do it in such a way that I execute it flawlessly, right? There are no mistakes, there are no issues, right? So we are also going to provide them with the knowledge on the ultimate skills. So this is how to do it well. This is how to, execute this flawlessly, right? So these are the things that we want to do in knowledge, on how to change and how to perform effectively. So let me just underline this. This is two and this is one, right? So knowledge is, the other part, right? And we remember what we just said. We said knowledge is only effective when the individual has awareness or desire. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I hope you are getting something. All right, so let's move to the next A in ADCA. Okay, so ability is the next thing that we want to talk about, right? And remember that I said that as you've gotten awareness, done properly, desire has been generated, right? Knowledge has been shared, right? It is time for guys to now implement these skills and behavior, right? So ability is the action part, right? It's the time to, you know, do what you have said you're going to do in terms of the new processes, the new steps, and all of that, right? So what we expect is that the individual's processes, the individual change, that we've said we will do, right? So it's a stage in which we implement these new steps, these new processes, right? Like I've written here, ability is defined by the individual demonstrating the required changes, right? It's pretty straightforward. So you're showing that, oh, now I understand these new ways. I know what I'm expected to do, and then I demonstrate this. So let me just underline demonstrate the required changes, right? And then we begin to see those results coming as we do. So at this stage, you want to assist your employees, your team members, the organization to not only learn the new behaviors, but also make sure that they are able to put the knowledge they got in the previous step to practice, right? So you also want to remove, barriers, blockages, whatever is stopping them from implementing. You want to make it easy for them to, you know, implement the desired skills and behaviors, right? Okay, so this is pretty straightforward here. Okay, so the final part of this outcome model is reinforcement, right? And what you want to do here is to sustain the changes, right? Remember that we first started at awareness. We have created the awareness of this change, right? And this awareness has generated desire, right? We had shared what the knowledge of what is required. This is how you're going to, do this change and all of that. Then we went further to, give them the opportunity to implement this knowledge using their abilities, right? So ability is about taking action, right? And then we said after this change is being implemented, we need to sustain it, right? It can be very, difficult to sustain change, but what you want to do is to make sure that the required support in terms of removing, hindrances, barriers, ensuring that there's some form of support, right, to the team members, to the people carrying out the change, to the people experiencing the change, right? This is something that can make or mar the entire process of change management, right? So how you know that you have successfully, implemented your change and people are transitioning from the old way to the new way is when you step back, right? When you're not there, when you're not looking, when there's no external force pushing them, People are doing it, they've fully embraced this new way of working. They are doing this without any form of, pressure, close marking, micromanaging, and all of that, right? Then you know that you have successfully, rolled out change and it is sustainable, right? So, and this is what we want, right? So again, remember that change management is systematic, right? And in managing transition. And I'm repeating this over and over again so that you remember that you don't just expect people to change because, oh, they just have to. You'll be surprised, right? People have a mind of their own and they can decide to hear what you're saying and do something else. So what you want is for people to willingly buy your idea, get into it, and then they do it, it now becomes their own project because now they understand why this is important, right? For them, for the business, for the organization, and for the, sustainability of the business, right? So this is how you want to think about managing change. This is how you want to drive sustainable, process improvements in your teams. All right, so let's look at the final model for change management here. That's Kotter's 8 step. Oh, fantastic. So in Kotter's 8 change management model, right, this was done by a professor, Dr. Kotter, and over a period of over 40 years, wow, 40 years of just observing changes, of seeing how leaders, and organizations are transforming their businesses, right? And you will see that we're increasingly becoming, getting deeper into this change management thing. Lewin's model was, very pretty simplistic and, very easy to, explain. But sometimes, projects are more complex than just looking at 3 steps, on freeze, change, and this, and now we looked at ADCAR where we had 5 steps where we are saying create awareness, do this, do that, and then do reinforcement. Now we are going to a more, advanced change management model, right, which is 8 quarters, 8 step, right? So we have 8 stages here in Kotter's change management model, and we are going to see how all of this, can be used to transform, the way you manage your improvement projects, your business transformation needs, the way you basically manage change, across the various phases for your teams. All right. So what are the 8 steps, right? And we're going to look at each of them in more detail, but I just want you to have a sense of, the 8 steps involved in Kotter's um, stage. Remember from our first 2 models, there was, creating awareness and unfreeze. Now, look, guess what? See where his own model starts from. It starts from number 1, create a sense of urgency, right? That's awareness, right? Create a sense of urgency on why this change is important. And we will get into each of them. So let me try not to explain it as we go ahead. So then he says number 2 is build a guiding coalition. And we will explain this. Number 3, form strategic vision. Number 5, enlist a volunteer army. And this can be a very useful framework for your team if you want to manage change, if you want to go through, oh, we're going to implement these new processes. Okay, how are we going to manage the change so that people, don't push back? We are not having resistance and it's not failing. The project does not fail, right? And this can be very useful for that. So number 5, we say enable action by removing barriers. Number 6, generate short-term wins. Number 7, sustain acceleration. And number 8, institute a change, right? So you see that this institute a change is similar to what we've been looking at as reinforcement, right? Reinforcement, right? In Lewis, we called it refreeze, right? Refreeze, right? And then we all started with awareness, right? Here, awareness. In Lewis, we call this unfreeze. And then everything in between, is where we're doing something related to the change, the actual change, right? So you see that there's some form of consistency in the train of thought, right? You need to first of all tell us about the change, why the change is important, then implement this change, right? Using all the steps, and then after you've implemented the steps, then create a system where this change can be sustained, right? That's how to think about, change management broadly. So you might see other change management models, even from your own experience, you can form your own model, right, as it goes on. But you always want to start by, first of all, understanding, the guys impacted by change, understanding why this change is important. And then you want to end by making sure that this change is sustained, right? All right, so let's look at each of these steps quickly. Number one, create a sense of urgency. So it says, help others see the need for the change through a bold, aspirational opportunity statement that communicates the importance of acting immediately. What is the gist here? The gist here is that people need to understand why this change is important and why it is important right now. Right? Why should we do it? Right? And why must we do it now? So this is something very critical. So we don't just want you to, oh, it'd be nice for us to do this change next year. No, it's not about, next year or next 5 years. We want it now, right? Because if we don't do it now, we are going to lose our opportunity. So there's going to be lost, sorry, my handwriting is slanted for some reason, but there are going to be lost opportunities if we don't do it now. All right, and this is not what we want. So we want people to see why this is important and why it is important right now. All right. Number two, build a guiding coalition, right? And this is talking about having those initial set of people who buy into this vision, who buy into, this desire for this change, right? So what you don't want is to be a one man army, right? So you want to be able to get a volunteer army that creates that 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 what's the word now? I'm looking for the right words. But it's an army of effective people, right? That it's made up of, the people in the team, like the people who experience, the change, and they're able to guide it, coordinate it, and communicate its activities. Let me give you an example, like my home country, for instance. Recently, there's been a lot of major changes, right? We had a change from one government to the other government, right? And one of the things that the new government wanted to do was to change some things, right? So they wanted to remove fuel subsidy. And they've been saying it even during their campaigns that, oh, we're going to remove fuel subsidy and all of that. Awareness was already created, right? There was awareness. People were being told, maybe people did not take it seriously, but awareness was being created. And then what actually happened was the new government came in. Remember that this is a subsidy or a process that has been on for decades, right? Maybe 40 years, if not more, right? And so we are all used to it. We all wanted this. And if that awareness and change management principles are not being applied, there's going to be severe resistance. There's going to be serious resistance. So what did the present government do? They decided that what, we're going to start by after creating awareness, let's build a guiding coalition. So they started getting, some bodies, union members, they will come, come to the villa, have a conversation with the president. This is the plan. We're going to provide incentive, try and get some people who are able to born of the ranks of the citizens, right? They are citizens. So it's not just, the leadership or the business saying, oh, we are going to do this. They are hearing it from people like them, telling them, you know what, this is important for our growth. This is important for our sustainability. Nigeria needs to survive, right? And all of that, right? So you want to do that as a step, right? So that you're able to start getting some traction. You're able to get some ambassadors who are able to further communicate why this change is important, right? So again, it's also a communication strategy, it's also an awareness strategy, but now it's coming from this volunteer army that is effective in coordinating and communicating what is required to deliver on our goals, right? Our aspirations. All right, number three, it says form a strategic vision and initiative. So we're going to clarify. So again, this is also about communicating, what the future is going to be Like, how is it going to be different from the past? And how do you want to make this future a reality? What are the things that we need to do, right? So we are creating this vision, we're casting this vision for people to see, right? Remember that we already have a volunteer army, so they're also going to help us cascade, this vision downstream, and across the board, right? So we have this done, right? What else? Number four, enlist a volunteer army, right? Enlist a volunteer army. And we're saying large scale change can only occur when massive numbers of people rally around a common opportunity. They must be bought in and urgent to drive the change, moving in the same direction. So, what you want to do, remember that we had an initial set of believers, people who said, okay, I understand this thing, right? But we're saying that at this stage, Kota is saying, basically that you want to get more people on board. Now, this is now you being deliberate about enlisting more people to say, you know what, if you think that you want to be a part of the transition team, you want to be a part of, driving this change, you want to be, a change agent to do this, you could identify some people, ask them, are you interested? Do you want to be a part of this? This is what we're trying to achieve. And, the more you have, the better for you, right? And all of that. So enlist a volunteer army and you see how all of this connects. What's the next stage? Enable action by removing barriers, right? So we want to remove barriers. We want to remove reasons why people might not take this change. So, one of the things that I see and, that is often missed is that we don't look at the impact of this change, on the individual. Like, try to experience the change for them. Most times, the people trying to implement the change are not, I'm probably not going to partake of the process of, doing things differently. So we're saying that if you put yourself in their shoes and try to run this change yourself, well, yeah, how is it different from, what we're already doing? You might begin to see some of these inefficiencies, some of the issues they complain about, some of the bottlenecks, and then it's your job as, the manager, the project manager, the team leader, or whoever is driving this change to remove these barriers, to say, you know what, to make this possible for us to run this, we have to support them, even if it's at the initial stage, right? We need to support them with this resource. We need to support them with this technological support, or with this financial palliative, or with this, just so that we're able to get the ball rolling, right? We're able to get it moving, right? And all of that. So enable action by removing barriers. We don't want them to have reasons to say, you know what, this thing is not going to work. Oh, I don't have data safe. I don't have internet. Oh, I don't have a laptop. I don't have a computer. Oh, I don't have access to water. Oh, this is not going to work because this, and that. So you more or less do an assessment of all the possible barriers and remove them as much as possible, right? And you see how you're able to manage change even more. All right. Number six, generate short-term wins, right? This is important. So wins are the molecules of result. And why this is important is because there are a lot of people who are very skeptical about change. Oh, it's not going to work, this is not going to happen, blah blah blah, and all that, pessimism, right? What you want to be able to do is that, yes, you might have a bigger goal, right? But find ways in which you are able to get some wins, right? Some small wins. It might not be your big goal, but there are some things that can even show that you're on track to others, to say, oh, if this guy was able to achieve this, there's a chance that that bigger objective, that bigger change that he has been talking about, right? He might be able to, do it. He might be able to, get this done for us, right? And you can see that if you're in my country, home country, Nigeria, you can see that part of the change management process that is going on as we are transitioning from an old government to a new government is that we're beginning to see some, short-term wins, right? So, for instance, you are seeing that we are doing a common exchange rate. We had multiple exchange rates before, right? Multiple windows. We're having one common windows. You're seeing, former officials who were, deemed to be problematic, being fired, being sacked, being reviewed, being asked to, go and be investigated. You're seeing some, short-term wins that are showing you that, oh, if we continue like this, oh, I'm actually this change might actually work, right? So that's what you want. You want things that can happen as early as possible, what we call low hanging fruits, right? And this is something you will hear in the course of the entire course, low hanging fruits. Let me just write this here, low hanging fruits, right? So this is what you want. You want a situation where you're able to get those short-term wins, and this will further convert, your skeptics to say, you know what, let's try this new way. Maybe there's something here. Maybe it's going to work, and all of that. All right. So what's the next thing? Number 7, we're saying sustain acceleration. So as you begin to generate short-term wins, as you begin to enlist your army, creating the right knowledge, you need to, be consistent, right? You need to keep pressing your gas pedal, keep accelerating. Don't relax, after you've gotten success, because you might end up, sabotaging. So you want to make sure that until the very end, you're sustaining, you're pushing, you are insisting that no, this is the new way, this is why we are doing it, and this is why from the very beginning it has to be clear why this change is necessary, right? So that you increase your credibility, you're able to improve the system consistently, right? So you're relentless, right? You're pushing through these challenges and trying to make sure that this change would eventually become a way of life, a way of working for everyone in your business, right? And then the final stage of quarter step is to institute the change, right? And this is where we reinforce or we rephrase all that we have been doing, right? We've implemented a new way. We've said we're going to sustain it. We're accelerating. Now we're saying we need to make this a way of life. We need to make this a way of working, right? So articulate the connections between the new behavior and organizational success. So people should be able to say that, you know what, based on this new way of working, right, we're able to achieve organizational success. Sorry, I'm out of space to write, right? So if we say we want to go back to the old way of working, there will be no organizational success, nothing for us. So we are saying the old way no longer works. The old way no longer gives us, success. But for us to continue to be successful as a business, we need to move to the new way of working, right? We need to move. So organizational success will only be guaranteed if we sustain and make sure that we continue to, you know, do the new way of working for us. And this is something very critical as you think through process improvement for manufacturing and all of that. You need to constantly think about, how am I going to make this change a way of life? How am I going to ensure that the people and the processes that will deliver on this new way will not get tired and go back to their old ways, right? Will not get tired and start cutting corners, but will remain, steadfast in ensuring that this change that we are seeing, right, it's something that is going to stay, right, and all of that. And then in a couple of months, years, you might decide that even this new way of working is no longer working for us. So we now need to create another new way of working. So it's a continuous process, it's a continuous cycle, right? If you look at the beginning of Kotter's chain model, it's a cycle, right? So it gets to a point where the new way we had created is no longer working. There are innovation, transformation in the industry, and then we need to create another change. So we start the cycle again, right? We start it again, with our awareness, we move to the change, and then we sustain that, we start again. And then you always want to have that open mind, right, to ensuring that this is done. All right. So I hope you've gotten some value in this change management portion, right? We looked at Lewin's change management model, right, where we talked about unfreeze, change, and refreeze, those 3 steps, right? And then we looked at ADKAR, right, which is 5 step, right, where we create awareness, right? And then we move to desire, we move to knowledge, right? then ability, and then reinforcement. And finally, we just looked at Kotter's 8 step, right, from 1 to 8. So I believe that with this framework, with these tools, you are able to better manage the transition between the old way and the new ways, and you would have less resistance as you implement transformation. All right, fantastic.